She raised the champagne flute above his head. 400 people in a Manhattan ballroom held their breath. The string quartet faltered mid-note. A waiter froze with his tray in the air. And the man in the worn gray sweater, the one she had just called a fraud, a beggar, an insult to the room, only pulled an old cloth-bound book a little closer to his chest. He did not flinch, even when the first cold spill reached the pages his mother had once written on. But we are ahead of ourselves. 40 minutes earlier, a tired man had stepped the 6th train at 59th and Lexington, a paper bag of peanuts in one hand, an old book in the other. He wore a gray sweater with a hole at the elbow, jeans faded at the knees, boots scuffed at the toes, a few days past shaving. No one on the train had looked at him twice. The book in his hands was Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. The spine had gone soft from years of reading. Inside the front cover, in blue ink faded to the color of a dream half remembered, someone had written 8 careful words. To my Keanu, from Mom. Christmas 1987. His mother had been gone more than 19 years. The book went with him everywhere. At a corner under a string of paper lanterns, he stopped at a peanut cart. Mordecai Abbey had been standing on that corner for 11 years, ever since he and his wife had arrived from Addis Ababa with a niece to put through college. My friend, you are late tonight. Train was slow. How is Selim? Midterms. She does not sleep. Keanu handed him a $20 bill for a $4 cone. Mordecai hesitated, as he always did, then folded the bill into the wooden box. 3 blocks west, the Ashmont Pinnacle rose 62 stories of black granite against the darkening sky. Tonight it was hosting the annual St. Bartholomew Children's Hospital Gala. $75,000 a plate. Nearly 400 guests in tuxedos and gowns. Somewhere on the committee's ledger sat a line for an anonymous personal donation of $475,000. The donor was the man walking down 56th Street in a sweater with a hole in the elbow. There was another reason he had come. On Monday in Brooklyn, a non-profit called the Silver Maple Foundation would break ground on a residential community for 240 homeless veterans. Keanu was its public ambassador. The construction contract, $32 million, had been awarded to Ashworth Global Holdings, a family-run firm whose reputation had dimmed in recent years. Keanu did not walk the red carpet. He never did. He went around to the service door, where the event coordinator, Delphine Radcliffe, was waiting. She recognized him and did not change her expression. Mr. Reeves, quiet corner by the east windows, no announcements. He stepped into the ballroom through the side door, walked along the east wall, quiet as a shadow, and lowered himself into a wingback chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Central Park lay below, dark and forested. He opened his book. Across the ballroom, at the long marble bar, Cressida Ashworth was telling a story. She was 38, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Ashworth Global, daughter-in-law of the founder. Her gown was pearl and cream. Around her throat hung a river of diamonds that had cost more than her childhood house in Columbus, Ohio. She was beautiful the way money is beautiful, polished, deliberate, without a strand out of place. Underneath the polish, something had been coiling tight all day. That afternoon, her father-in-law Bowmont had listened to her partnership proposal for 3 full minutes, and then, without acknowledging that she had spoken, turned to a junior vice president 7 years younger than her and asked for his opinion. 12 years of marriage into the Ashworth name, 12 years of her own title, and still at board meetings, she felt like a woman invited to a table rather than a woman seated at one. Around her stood her small court, her husband Thornton, 42, CFO of the firm, Lorelei Whitcomb, Director of Public Relations, the company phone glued to her hand as she live-streamed to 340,000 followers, and 2 other couples from the world of hedge funds. Cressida was describing how she had personally turned down a candidate the previous Tuesday because he had worn shoes that were obviously from an outlet mall. Her friends laughed. "Bowmont still treats me like furniture," she murmured to Lorelei. 12 years. Tonight I am not letting anything make this place look like less than what we paid for." Her eyes drifted across the room and stopped at the east windows. A man in a gray sweater, reading a book, a visible hole at the elbow. Scuffed boots, a crumpled paper bag of what looked impossibly like street vendor peanuts. She stared. In a room where every detail had been curated for months, the man by the windows was a tear in the canvas. An accident, a mistake that had come through the wrong door. Something in her, already coiled tight from the boardroom, snapped taut. "Who let that one in?" She set her glass down. "Get your phone." Lorelei raised the company phone. The small red dot on her screen began to pulse. Across the ballroom, a freelance photojournalist named Josephine Marchetti had also noticed the man in the sweater. She was 28, 2 hours into an NDA-bound assignment that would pay her last semester of tuition. Her camera lifted halfway to her eye, then lowered. She did not take the picture. She did not walk away either. She stood where she was. Cressida began to walk across the ballroom. Her husband followed. Lorelei followed, filming. 3 sets of eyes were already fixed on the wingback chair. The woman about to humiliate him, the young photographer who had just decided not to record him, and an old security chief by the door who had been a detective long enough to know when a room was about to become a problem. Only one of those 3 understood yet that the problem was not going to be the man with the book. Cressida crossed the marble in sharp, confident clicks. 3 steps short of the chair, her heel caught on the foot of a cocktail table. She stumbled. The full flute of champagne in her hand tipped, and a long stream of pale gold spilled across the floor. She bent to snatch at the hem of her gown. Another hand reached the floor first. Keanu had seen her stumble from the corner of his eye. Without thinking, he did what his grandfather had taught him. Took a cloth napkin from the nearest table, crouched, and began to blot the champagne from the edge of her dress. Cressida did not see a man helping her. She saw, in that compressed, airless half-second, a man in a threadbare sweater kneeling at her feet in front of her husband, her friends, her employees, and 340,000 Instagram followers. Her face flooded with color, not gratitude, shame reshaping itself in real time into rage. She yanked the napkin from his hand and flung it onto the floor. "Don't touch my dress. Don't you dare touch my dress." Keanu rose to his full height. He raised both hands, palms out. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I was only trying to help." She stepped back. Her eyes moved over him and settled on the only explanation her mind could manage. "Your staff. Where is your manager?" "Ma'am, I don't work here. I'm a guest." Silence. Then she laughed. It was a high, brittle laugh. Her friends laughed with her. Lorelei raised the phone higher. 26,000 concurrent viewers. The numbers were climbing. "A guest, in that sweater, at $75,000 a plate. Sir, and I use the word loosely, this is not a shelter. This is a room full of people who have spent lifetimes earning the right to be here. Walking in off the street in a thrift store pullover is not brave. It is an insult to every human being in this room who built something." Keanu only looked at her, without heat, without fear, a sadness so quiet it almost seemed like patience. The crowd had grown. 30 people, 50, 70. The string quartet slowed to a murmur and then stopped. A man pushed through the crowd. Everett Sinclair, the friend who had quietly managed Keanu's philanthropic for 12 years. "Mrs. Ashworth, please. There has been a serious misunderstanding." "Sinclair, stay in your lane." Keanu, almost imperceptibly, shook his head at Everett. "Let me." Cressida began to circle him slowly. "Do you have any idea what the canapés cost? More than the rent of whatever apartment you're coming from. These people," she swept her arm outward, "earned their seats. Their grandfathers earned their seats. And you, in a sweater with a hole in the elbow, think you can wander in because a door was left open?" His voice, when it came, was so quiet that guests at the edge of the circle leaned in to hear. "Ma'am, I came for the children at St. Bartholomew. I don't think they check sleeves." Something moved through the crowd, a small, uneven ripple. A woman at table 4 set her glass down and looked at her hands. A man in a dark blue tuxedo near the bar turned to his wife and took half a step forward. His wife took his wrist and whispered audibly in the hush, "Don't. The Ashworths will remember." The moment passed. 400 people of conscience, of education, of wealth, of power. And not one of them would step between the woman and the man in the sweater. Not because they agreed with her. Because tomorrow there would be boardrooms and committees where one might find the Ashworths waiting. Cressida stepped closer. Her finger rose, not at him, at the cloth-bound book tucked against his ribs. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into the quiet, poisonous register of a woman who had found a new way to wound. "And what is this, a prop? Are you pretending to be intellectual too? Let me guess, you picked it up at a Salvation Army, to look thoughtful." Her hand lifted. A waiter was passing behind her with a tray of champagne. She reached back without looking and took one. Keanu saw the motion. He did not flinch. He only very slightly drew the old book closer against his chest. She did not throw the champagne at his face. She tilted the flute downward and poured the pale gold liquid directly onto the book in his hands. It soaked the cloth binding. It ran across his knuckles. It bled through the edges of the pages with a faint, terrible whisper, the sound that paper makes when it is drinking. There, her voice was light with satisfaction. "Now it matches the rest of you." The ballroom did not merely go quiet. It went still, in the way a forest goes still when a large animal has entered it. A glass slipped from someone's hand at the back of the crowd and shattered on the marble. No one turned to look. Keanu looked down at the book. He lifted it slowly. He turned it in his hands the way a man turns a wounded bird. He opened the front cover. The 8 words in fading blue ink had begun to bleed. The letters were losing their edges the way a face does through rain on glass. He stared for a long moment. Then he raised his eyes to Cressida. No anger, no outrage, only that same quiet, bottomless sadness. "Ma'am, my mother gave me this book in 1987. She died 19 years ago. It's all right, book's dry." A sound broke in the crowd. A woman in a dark green gown had put her hand over her mouth and begun very quietly to cry. A man 2 tables over turned his whole body away. At the back of the room, Josephine Marchetti lowered her head and did not raise it again. For a single instant, less than a breath, a crack of doubt ran across Cressida's face. Her eyes darted to Thornton. Thornton's eyes were on the book. Thornton was not smiling anymore. The crack closed. Pride, the oldest survival instinct of the humiliated, rose up and covered it. She took a fresh flute from a table behind her. "Charming story now, please." A tight smile. "Leave." Keanu did not answer her. He did not answer anyone. He pressed the wet book against his chest, the way a father might hold a child he was carrying home through weather. He turned, and he began slowly to walk toward the main doors. The crowd parted. Halfway to the doors, a figure stepped forward from the shadow of the side wall. Calloway Brennan was a former NYPD detective. He had been watching from his post for the last 8 minutes. 3 times he had considered stepping in. 3 times he had remembered that the Ashworths held a significant stake in the building that paid him, and that his daughter was 2 years from finishing nursing school on his paycheck. He was not proud of those 3 moments. But now he stepped forward and placed himself gently between Keanu and the path to the main doors. "Sir, there are press vans already on Park Avenue. I can take you down through the service elevator." Keanu looked at him. And Calloway, who had been a detective long enough to know a face under pressure, saw the face under the face, and for one thin second he was quite sure the air had stopped moving. He kept his own face very still. Keanu nodded. "Thank you, sir." Behind them, Cressida raised her glass. "Standards," she said, her voice ringing across the hushed room. "Standards, ladies and gentlemen. That is all this ever was." Thornton laughed, a beat too late. But at the edges of the ballroom, people were already moving, not toward her but away. A woman in a silver gown placed her untouched champagne on a side table and walked out without saying goodbye to her husband. A Connecticut senator lifted his phone to his ear and spoke 3 quiet sentences before slipping out through the side corridor. No one said a word. That was the worst part. At the service elevator, Calloway swiped his badge. Just before the doors closed, Keanu looked back once. Through the narrowing slit of light, he met, for a fraction of a second, the eyes of Josephine Marchetti. She was standing alone by the wall, camera hanging unused, face wet. She did not raise the camera. He did not nod. He closed his eyes for one moment, and the doors closed with him. The elevator descended. Above, the live stream clicked past 78,000 viewers. In a midtown newsroom, an editor named Elena Giordano had already screenshotted the exact frame and was pushing the alert live. The hashtag Bookstry began to trend 17 minutes later. By 9 o'clock, the video had left the platforms and was moving through the older, slower channels, private group texts, family chains, neighborhood Facebook pages. It reached grandmothers in Ohio, retired firemen in Pennsylvania, Beaumont Ashworth's younger brother in Greenwich, who called Beaumont at 8 minutes past 9 and said only 3 words: "Turn on CNN." Inside the ballroom, Cressida did not yet know any of this. She was laughing at something the senator's wife had said when Laura Lee lowered the company phone and stared at it for a long time. Cress. Cressida did not hear her. Cress. The second time carried the kind of weight that made the others turn. Lorelei was white, not pale. White, she held the phone out screen first, as if it were something radioactive she needed to be rid of. The headline was in red. The photograph beneath it was a still from Lorelei's own live stream, cropped tight around Keanu's face as he held the wet book to his chest. The name beneath, Keanu Charles Reeves, set in bold. Cressida read it, she read it again. Something small and terrible happened in her chest. Not a breaking, a dropping. That is Photoshop. Thornton had taken the phone. His face was doing something strange. Collapsing, perhaps, though Thornton Ashworth had never been a man who's collapsed in public. Cressida, it's him. No, it's him. She looked out across the ballroom, and for the first time since she had entered it 4 hours ago, she saw it as it actually was. The guests were leaving, not as a wave. In the slow, practiced evacuation of people who had spent their lives knowing how to exit a sinking room without seeming to notice it was sinking. The ones who did not leave were worse. They were standing where they had been standing, and they were looking, not at her, at each other. Her knees felt strange. The Connecticut senator, Harold Vensworth, godfather to her elder son, had finished putting on his coat. He turned. He began to walk back through the ballroom, not out of it, and Cressida felt for one wild moment that he was coming to save her. He came straight to her. He stopped 2 feet from her, and his face was the face she had seen him wear only in Senate hearings. "Mrs. Ashworth, I don't know what the full story is yet, but whatever it is, this is not a room you should be in tonight. Go home." He waited 1 beat. "Go home, Cressida." Then he turned, took his wife's elbow and walked out. Thornton's phone rang. The screen read, "Dad, he's coming." "Who is?" "My father. He's in a cab already." 24 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened again, and Beaumont Ashworth walked in. He was 72, and the walk was not easy for him. He was using the olive wood cane that had belonged to his own father, a man who had carried it home from a rail yard in Scranton in 1953. He had not changed his clothes. He was wearing a gray wool cardigan over a white shirt, the clothes of a man who had been watching the evening news in his living room when a phone call had brought his world down. His shoes were wet from the rain. He walked straight to his daughter-in-law. He stopped 3 feet from her. He leaned briefly on the cane. He did not raise his voice, but the guests who remained were close enough to hear. "Cressida, look at," she looked. "I grew up in a 2-bedroom row house in Scranton. My father spent 31 years in a rail yard. My mother cleaned office buildings at night. I learned who Keanu Reeves is to the Brooklyn Veterans Project 6 weeks ago. I did not tell you because I did not believe it was relevant to your role. His voice, when it came again, was no louder than a whisper. I was wrong. Cressida's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tonight I learned 2 things. The first is that my daughter-in-law assaulted the public face of a project that puts 240 veterans into homes. The second is worse. The second is that she would have done exactly the same thing to a man whose name she had never heard. That is the wound, not the name, the character. He took a breath. Put on your coat. Do not speak to the press. Go home to your children. Tomorrow morning at 10, you and I will meet, and tonight, pray. Pray that he is a better man than we have been. He did not wait for her to answer. He turned. He walked back across the ballroom, the cane striking the marble in slow, deliberate tss, leaving damp prints on the stone. He walked out into the rain. Cressida's knees buckled. Thornton caught her awkwardly. She did not cry. She did not speak. She stared at the wet marble where her father-in-law's shoes had left their prints, and somewhere in her chest a word tried to form, a name, perhaps, or a plea, and found nothing to fasten to. No one came to help. 3 blocks west, Mordecai had not packed up his cart. He did not know why. And then, from the direction of Park Avenue, a figure appeared, walking slowly, the way a man walks when he is carrying something delicate. My friend. Keanu stopped in front of the cart. He smiled. Not a large smile, a real one. Mordecai. Somebody up there reminded me why I would rather stand down here with you than up there with them. He squeezed the old man's shoulder once. Good night, my friend. Mordecai did not ask him anything else. He had lived long enough to know when not to. Saturday came under a low gray sky. By 9 in the morning, 11 news vans were parked outside Ashworth Global. Keanu did not go there. He had sent word through Everett that he would meet Bowmont in Brooklyn, at a coffee shop called the Quiet Cup, near the empty lot where the homes would be built. If we're going to talk about this project, let's talk about it on the ground it will stand on. The shop was owned by Reuben Holloway, an Iraq War veteran who had lost his left leg to a roadside bomb in 2007. He had served Keanu coffee maybe a dozen times in the past year and had never once asked him for a photograph. At 10 o'clock, Keanu was already at the corner table, the warped book in front of him. He had spent most of the night blotting it. The bell chimed. Bowmont came in first, leaning on his cane. Behind him came Cressida. She had not slept. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot. She wore a plain black sweater over a white blouse. No makeup, no jewelry except her wedding ring. Bowmont addressed Keanu directly. Mr. Reeves, I am not here to defend her. I am asking for time. Time for her to do the work. Time for this company to do the work. Keanu turned his head slightly toward Cressida. Mrs. Ashworth, you haven't spoken yet. Do you want to? I don't have a defense, Mr. Reeves. I don't have an explanation that wouldn't be an excuse. Last night I destroyed something that cannot be replaced. And I destroyed it because I actually believed, that a person in an old sweater was worth less than a person in a designer dress. Her voice broke. I'm so deeply sorry, not for what this is going to cost me, for what I did to you, and for all the people I've done versions of this to, whose names I never learned. Keanu let the silence sit. Mrs. Ashworth, I want to tell you something I don't talk about often. My sister Kim has lived with leukemia for over 2 decades. There were stretches when she lived in hospitals. And I want you to know who I watched treat her best during those years. It was not the wealthy donors who came by for photographs. It was the night janitor. A woman who cleaned her room at 2 in the morning. She learned my sister's name. She asked how she was sleeping. She noticed when Kim was scared. He set his hands on either side of the warped book. Every time someone walked past Kim like she was furniture, because she was just a sick woman in a bed, I watched her shrink a little. She survived. But the way the world treated her never quite left her. Last night you reminded me of the people who walked past my sister. That is what I want you to sit with. Not what the book cost, what it means about how you see people. Cressida lowered her face into her hands. Her shoulders shook, not the dramatic crying of a woman performing grief, but the small, exhausted shaking of a person who has run out of ways to hold something in. Keanu turned to Bowmont. "Sir, 2 officers from the NYPD came to my hotel last night. They told me they have probable cause to charge your daughter-in-law with assault in the 3rd degree. They asked me whether I wanted to press charges. I told them no. The room was very quiet. I told them no for one reason. Prison does not teach a person to see other people. It teaches them to hate the walls. What Mrs. Ashworth needs to learn, if she is ever going to learn it, she cannot learn from a judge, only from her own life, and only if she is willing." He turned to Cressida. "This is not forgiveness, ma'am. Forgiveness is a word I don't use lightly, and you have not earned it. This is a decision I am making for me." He turned back to Bowmont. "About the project, I'm not pulling out. But I want 3 things added before I sign. 15% of the units go to families below the local median income, not just veterans. Ashworth Global commits to a workplace dignity program for all 4,200 employees, designed by a working group that includes janitors and mailroom staff, not just executives. And 3 people your daughter-in-law personally fired for what your HR records describe as cultural fit: Mateo Reyes, Danica Price, and Marisol Tan. Get an open offer to return with full back pay and a written apology from the firm." Beaumont's jaw worked. "Done. All of it, today." They shook hands. The hand was old, cold, steady. Keanu turned to Cressida one more time. He did not extend his hand. "Mrs. Ashworth, I am not going to give you a list of things to do. I am not your teacher. What you do with the rest of your life is your decision. But I'll say one thing. Look in a mirror. Actually look. You may not like what is there. Look anyway." She nodded, still without speaking. Keanu stood, picked up the book, warped, watermarked, but his, and walked out into the rain. On the sidewalk, Everett caught up with him. "Keanu, you had her. You had every card. Why didn't you?" Keanu looked across Vanderbilt Avenue toward the empty lot. "Everett, I have been the man in the worn sweater my whole life. Putting her in handcuffs would have taught the country one thing, that power beats power. That's the easy lesson. The harder lesson is that kindness doesn't have to win. It just has to refuse to lose. If she changes, the whole country watching will have learned something new. If she doesn't, in a year I'll write to the district attorney myself and we'll start over. But I'd like to give the harder lesson a chance first." By Sunday, every major network led with the story. When the news broke that Keanu Reeves had refused to press charges, the country split in 2. On one side, admiration. This is grace. This is what dignity looks like. On the other, pointed frustration. If this had happened to a teacher, to a nurse, to a delivery driver, there would be no choice about pressing charges. The luxury of refusing is itself a privilege. Mercy is real, but it is not justice. Both sides were right. And underneath the public conversation, a quieter one began. People began to write about the people they had not seen. The waitress whose name they had never asked. The Uber driver who had told them briefly about his daughter. The night janitor at the office. The man who sold them peanuts on the corner. The hashtag, "the one you didn't see," grew into something larger than anything the producers had been able to plan. 9 months passed the way 9 months pass in a city like New York. Not slowly, not quickly, but the way water passes under a bridge you cross every day. In the 4th month, Cressida moved out of the penthouse on Central Park West. The apartment was sold to pay the civil settlement and the children's therapy costs. She took a small walk-up in Astoria, Queens, 3rd floor, no doorman. She was packing the kitchen of the old penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon when she found the letter. It was in a drawer she had never opened. The drawer that had always held the things the housekeeper kept for herself. A reading magnifier, a spare pair of glasses, 2 prayer cards, a small photograph of a boy in a graduation gown, and at the bottom a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter, written by hand, in careful English learned in adulthood by a woman who had already been fluent in something else. It was dated 5 years ago. It had never been sent, Mrs. Ashworth. You probably do not remember mentioning his name to a colleague at the firm. I know you have so many things in your head. But when my son Matteo came home that day with the internship letter, he cried. He is the first person in our family to go to college. He is the first person in our family who will wear a tie to work. I do not have the words in English or in Spanish for what this means to us. I only have the words to say thank you. Thank you for seeing him. Rosalind Moreno? Cressida read the letter. She read it again. She sat down on the floor of the kitchen. Rosalind Moreno had worked for her family for 12 years. She had been in her home more hours of the week than Cressida had been. She had cooked breakfast for her children every school morning since the oldest was born. She had walked the younger one to the pediatric dentist when Cressida had a board meeting. Cressida did not know Rosalind's middle name, did not know she had studied at a teaching college in Oaxaca before immigrating, did not know Rosalind's husband had died of pancreatic cancer 2 years earlier without health insurance, and that the hospital bills were still being paid down at $60 a month. From a check Cressida signed every other Friday without ever looking at the name at the bottom. And she did not know, until this afternoon, that Rosalind Moreno had a son. Because Cressida did remember the name Matteo Reyes. She had signed the paperwork terminating his internship 3 months after it began. The formal reason had been cultural fit. The real reason had been old shoes, a Queen's accent, and a question about starting salary he had once asked her in front of 2 senior partners. She had fired the son of the woman who cooked her children's breakfast, and Rosalind had kept coming to work for 4 more years. Without saying a word, Cressida did not cry at first. She simply sat with the letter in her hands and let the information finish arriving. It arrived in waves, first the fact of Matteo, then the 4 years of silence, then the $60 checks. Then, slowly, the 12 years of mornings in which a woman she had never really looked at had fed her children, while carrying this inside her the whole time. Only then did she cry. She cried for a long time alone on the floor of a kitchen she no longer owned, with nobody watching and nobody filming and nobody posting a hashtag. She understood, somewhere in that crying, that this was the first time she had cried without an audience since she was a child. The following week she went to find Rosalind. She did not knock on the door. She sat on the step across the street for 2 hours and waited. At 5:30 Rosalind came out. She saw Cressida immediately. She did not look surprised, only tired. Cressida did not cross the street. She called across the traffic only one thing. I know about Matteo. Rosalind did not answer. She only closed her eyes, briefly, as if a weight she had been carrying for a long time had been put down without her permission. They met at a diner on 2nd Avenue. Cressida did not ask for forgiveness. She knew better. She asked only for Matteo's email address. I am not trying to fix it, she said. I cannot fix it. I only want to sit with what I did. Rosalind looked at her for a long time. Then she wrote Matteo's email address on a napkin and slid it across. He is stronger than you took from him. That is the only reason I am giving you this. Not because of you, because of him. Matteo agreed to meet her 2 weeks later at a coffee shop in Jackson Heights. He was 26 now, a master's student at CUNY, managing the overnight shift at a Verizon store. He had his mother's face. He did not smile when Cressida sat down across from him. She said, "Will you tell me what happened to you from the day I signed the paper?" And for 40 minutes, he told her. He told her about the phone call from HR on a Friday afternoon, no explanation given. About the 2 months afterward when he could not get out of bed. About his mother who had mortgaged the one family car to pay his last semester of tuition. About the therapist he eventually found on a sliding scale. about his grandfather in Oaxaca, who had died while he was still not speaking to anyone. When he finished, she said, "Mateo, I have been in your mother's presence every day for 12 years, and I did not know you existed. I am not here to be forgiven. I am here because I should have been here 12 years ago. Thank you for giving me the time." Mateo did not say he forgave her. He did not say they would meet again. But when she stood up to leave, he stood up too, and walked to the door of the coffee shop ahead of her, and held it open for her to pass through. A small thing, but a gesture between people. Cressida did not return to corporate life. She did not start a foundation. She did not give it a name. She took a volunteer position 3 days a week at a community center in Queens, assisting with a financial literacy program for single mothers. She did not tell them her full name. She showed up, she listened, she brought coffee. One morning in May, a young woman named Dolores recognized her from the video. She stood up in the middle of the class. "You're her. You're the woman in the video. What are you doing here?" The room went quiet. 12 women waited. Cressida did not run. She stood up. "My name is Cressida Ashworth. Yes, I am the woman in the video. I am here because I am trying to learn what I should have learned 38 years ago. If any of you would like me to leave, I will." No one asked her to leave. The class resumed. At the end, as Cressida was stacking chairs, Dolores came to her. "My mother-in-law cleaned offices in Midtown for 30 years. Nobody there ever learned her name. Don't forget what you just said." Then she put on her coat and left. As for Keanu, he did not appear on a single television program in the 9 months that followed. He declined every interview request. But one Saturday morning in September, on his way back from the Brooklyn site, he stopped at the corner of 60th and Lexington. Mordecai was still there, under the same string of paper lanterns. "My friend, how is the book?" Keanu thought about it. The book was at home on the small table by his reading chair, still warped, still watermarked. The blue ink on the title faded now into something closer to a cloud than a sentence. He still read from it most evenings. The ink was not coming back, but the words were there. "The book is fine, Mordecai. It is drying still. And Selam. She is in her 2nd year at Hunter, reading Gibran. Because of you. Because of both of us, maybe." Mordecai laughed softly. He handed Keanu a cone of peanuts. Keanu handed him a folded $20 bill. Neither of them mentioned the gala. Neither of them ever would. To Mordecai, nothing had changed in 9 months, and that, for Keanu, was the whole point. The peanut man and his friend. That was all. That was everything. When The Atlantic published a long-form piece about the incident that fall, Keanu agreed to contribute a short afterward. "Every person you walk past today is carrying something you cannot see," he wrote. "The man selling peanuts at the subway stop put his niece through college on those peanuts. The woman cleaning your office at midnight is someone's mother, someone's whole world. The kid behind the counter in old sneakers might be the first in his family to finish school, or he might just be tired. Either way, he is a person. Treat him like one." The piece was shared 3 million times in its first week. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, a retired fireman cut it out of a magazine and pinned it to the corkboard in his garage. The story ends here. Not neatly, not completely. Stories like this do not end neatly, and it is a kind of dishonesty to pretend they do. But before the screen goes dark, 2 small questions. Not to answer aloud, only to sit with. For 40 minutes on a Friday evening, a woman humiliated a stranger in front of nearly 400 of the wealthiest, most educated, most powerful people in the city of New York. And not one of them stepped forward. Not one of them said, "Stop." The next time you are in a room and you see a smaller, quieter version of this, will you be one of the 400? Or will you be the 401st? And the other? Who is the Mateo in your life? Who is the person who has been near you for years, whose full name you never bothered to learn? Whose child you never asked about? Whose story you walked past because you had decided, without deciding, that it was not a story that concerned you? The man in the old sweater at the bus stop might be Keanu Reeves. But that is not the point. The point is that even when he isn't, he still matters.